With 1,300 land-based aircraft and another 500 aboard aircraft carriers, the U.S. is counting on airstrikes to destroy Iraq's ability to fight and open the way for American ground forces to liberate Kuwait.
The theory ought to be one which many people criticized us for in Vietnam, and that is firepower and not manpower. I mean, our firepower is greater than theirs, and we ought to use it that way.
Radar-evading stealth fighters would almost certainly fire the first shots. 2,000-pound bombs dropped at night on Iraqi command centers. The next shots might well come from Navy ships in the Persian Gulf and Red Sea, firing Tomahawk cruise missiles. The low-flying unmanned aircraft would be targeted against the communications and radar sites that control Iraq's air defense network. That would be followed by round-the-clock air raids on an expanding number of military targets.
Enormous amount of airplanes available on day one to be used at various times during the day and night. You keep the pressure on all day long.
The raids would be led by Air Force and Navy fighters, which would shoot down Iraqi interceptors as electronic warfare planes blinded Iraqi radar screens. Then, flying low to avoid Iraq's surface-to-air missiles, Air Force and Navy jets would begin dropping bombs.
You start with a strategic air campaign to hit strategic targets in Iraq. And that would start, of course, with the air capabilities of Iraq, their air defenses and their air forces. It would move in the strategic phase still to hitting the chemical and the biological and the nuclear facilities.
The U.S. would also turn its firepower on the 500,000 Iraqi troops in the Kuwaiti theater.
You're going to have a major bombardment, by all means possible, against the dug-in forces along the Kuwaiti-Saudi Arabian border and against the reinforcing forces, which at the present time are up north along the Kuwait-Iraqi border.
That bombardment would consist of everything from the 16-inch guns of the two battleships in the Persian Gulf to carpet bombing by B-52s. While some strategists think that might be enough to force an Iraqi surrender, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff isn't counting on it.
Recognizing that such attack will do grievous damage to the defenders after such a strategy has been executed, the decision is still in the hands of the defender to decide whether or not he has had enough punishment.
A U.S. ground offensive would be designed to make up Saddam's mind for him. The timing and location of that offensive would depend on the success of the air campaign in blasting holes in the Iraqi defenses. The U.S. would send 2 or 3 tank divisions either to outflank the Iraqi lines or punch through them at the point of least resistance.
Wherever it's fractured, you're going to penetrate through that fracture in their defense area.
Combat engineers would use explosives to clear a route through the Iraqi minefields and breach the fortifications. Tank divisions, supported by artillery, helicopter gunships, and fixed-wing aircraft, would punch through.
Once you get past those dug-in infantry are useless. All those divisions are nothing. They can do nothing. They're going to die on the vine.
Behind the Iraqi infantry lie tank divisions waiting in reserve. But now they will have to fight on American terms.
You create a situation that forces his reserves out of their defensive positions, get them out in the open and moving where we can make use of our superior intelligence, our superior weaponry, and our air power, particularly our air power, to destroy him out in the open.
Behind those tank divisions lie still more tank divisions, this time the elite Republican Guards located in southern Iraq. If Iraq has not yet surrendered, American ground forces would almost certainly push into Iraq and take on Saddam's best troops.